Dallas Love Field Airport. A Tuesday morning in the spring of 1974, 6:47 a.m. The terminal smells the way all airports smell before the rest of the world has fully woken up. Burnt coffee, floor wax, and something unnameable that lives inside recycled air. The main check-in hall of Continental Airlines is already moving, already humming with that particular kind of tension that builds in crowded spaces where strangers are thrown together by schedules they didn't write and delays they can't control. The line stretches back, maybe 25 people deep. A businessman with a loosened tie checks his watch every 30 seconds. An older couple shares a single rolling bag with a broken wheel that clicks against the linoleum every time they move forward. A mother with two small children tries to keep everyone together with the quiet desperation of someone who has already lost a shoe somewhere between the parking lot and the terminal doors. Nobody is exactly happy, but nobody is making it anyone else's problem. That is the unofficial contract of the check-in queue. You suffer. You wait. You keep it to yourself. Chuck Norris is fourth in line. He is 33 years old, 5 feet 10, 168 pounds. He is wearing a plain brown jacket over a gray shirt, dark jeans, and a pair of worn leather boots that have walked a lot of floors in a lot of places. He is carrying a tan duffel bag over one shoulder and holding a small folder of papers he's been reading since he arrived, schedules, callbacks, a draft of something he's been working on. There is nothing about him that announces itself. That is for people who know exactly the point. By 1974, Chuck Norris had been training in martial arts for 15 years. He had won the professional middleweight karate championship 6 consecutive times. He had trained men who went on to fight in Olympic rings, in tournaments across 3 continents, in rings that smelled like sweat and chalk dust, and the specific electricity of people who have decided to test themselves honestly. He had a school in Thousand Oaks. He had students who drove 4 hours to train with him twice a week. He was in any room where the people in it understood what they were looking at, one of the most dangerous men alive. He was also, in this moment, simply a man in a check-in line, waiting his turn, reading his papers, moving forward when the line moved forward. He is not looking at his watch. He is not shifting his weight with impatience. The waiting does not seem to cost him anything. A few people in the line have noticed him. Not because of who he is not yet famous in the way he will later become, but because of something less definable, something about the quality of his stillness. The way he takes up exactly the space he occupies and no more, and is completely comfortable in it. Most people are not comfortable in airports. Chuck Norris seems like he could wait here for a week and be fine. Wade Garrett arrives at 6:52. He is 27 years old, 6 feet 2, 273 pounds. He is an amateur heavyweight bodybuilding competitor out of Fort Worth. 3 years of regional titles, a physique that has won him trophies the size of mailboxes, and a steady income doing personal training at a gym where the walls are mirrored and the music never drops below 90 decibels. He is wearing a white muscle tank. In April, at 6 in the morning, because the arms are not a detail. The arms are the sentence. He walks the way men who have never been seriously inconvenienced by a crowd learn to walk. Not aggressive, exactly, but certain. Certain in the way that comes from 6 years of watching rooms adjust themselves to your arrival. Watching people step aside. Watching faces change. Mistaking the mechanics of that adjustment, which is simply biology, simply smaller organisms making instinctive room for larger ones for something earned. He has a flight to catch. He is late. Neither of these facts, in his experience, has ever been a reason to wait. Behind him, half a step back, is his training partner, a man named Kyle. Kyle is also large, also built, also wearing an expression that says the two of them move through the world together, and the world has generally found this arrangement acceptable. Wade reaches the line and begins moving along its length. Not through it, along it. He shoulders past the businessman without a word. The businessman steps aside without protest and watches his own shoes. He shoulders past the mother with the children. She pulls one of the kids toward her and says nothing. He shoulders past two more people who rearrange themselves against the rope guides and look away. The line does not push back. It never has. He reaches Chuck Norris and applies the same movement. The same lateral pressure with the same expectation of the same result. His shoulder makes contact and carries the full implication. This space is negotiable. You're smaller. The smaller body moves. Chuck doesn't move. He doesn't brace dramatically. He doesn't raise his hands. He shifts his weight maybe 2 degrees, rotates very slightly at the hip, and Wade's shoulder finds nothing to push against. It's not resistance in any physical sense the bodybuilder can identify. It's more like pushing against the idea of a door that turns out not to be there. Wade stops. He looks down at the smaller man. He runs the kind of immediate physical assessment that 6 years in the gym has trained into reflex. 5 feet 10. Compact. Nothing about the build that explains why the body didn't move. Hey, Wade says. He keeps his voice at the volume of a man who expects to be heard the first time. I need to get through. Move up. Chuck doesn't turn around immediately. He finishes the sentence he was reading. He folds the papers carefully and slides them into his jacket pocket. Then he turns. Slowly. Completely. The kind of turn that gives the other person his full face and full attention, which is, in its own way, more unsettling than irritation would have been. In the first second, Chuck's left hand meets Wade's wrist, not blocking it, not catching it, but redirecting it outward in a motion so smooth that several witnesses later describe it as looking like Wade's own arm simply changed its mind about where it was going. There is no collision. There is no impact. The arm just goes somewhere else. In the second, Chuck's right leg generates a side kick from a chambered position that crosses the distance between them in a time that is genuinely too fast for the human eye to follow at this range. The force in that kick is not a product of the muscles involved. It is a product of the chain. Legs against the floor, hips turning, core tightening, all of it converting into a single point of contact at the solar plexus where the impact travels directly to the diaphragm with nothing wasted. 168 pounds, channeled through a 15-year trained kinetic chain, can produce more force at that contact point than 273 pounds of untrained mass can generate in a lateral push. That is not opinion. That is physics. In the third second, the impact reaches Wade's diaphragm. The diaphragm goes into spasm. His mouth opens. Nothing comes out. No air is moving in either direction, and his hands go to his midsection by reflex. The ancient, automatic gesture of a body trying to protect the site of damage after the damage has already happened. In the fourth second, Chuck's left leg sweeps the back of Wade's support leg at the precise moment when all 273 pounds of him are committed to that leg because of the destabilization from the kick. The geometry is simple. Remove the last remaining support when the center of gravity is already off-center, and what follows is not a fall. It is a collapse. Total. Immediate. Geometric. In the fifth second, 273 pounds of Wade Garrett meets the linoleum floor of Dallas Love Field Airport with an impact that sends a vibration through the terminal floor that every person within 20 feet can feel in the soles of their feet. He lands flat on his back. Arms out, legs out, completely conscious, completely unable to breathe, looking up at the fluorescent lights of a check-in hall while 30-something people look down at him in a silence so complete that the only sound is the ambient ventilation of the building. Chuck does not stand over him. He does not say anything. He turns back to the counter, lifts his duffel bag, and sets it on the scale. Sorry for the delay, he says to Sandra. Does the bag make weight? Sandra looks at the scale. Her voice operates on something close to autopilot. 44 pounds, she says. Well within the limit. She prints the boarding pass. Her hands are not entirely steady, but she manages it. Chuck takes the boarding pass, thanks her quietly, picks up the bag, and walks toward the gate with the unhurried, even pace of a man who has checked in, gotten his pass, and has some time before boarding. Nothing about his walk suggests that anything significant has just happened. Behind him, Wade Garrett is beginning the slow and painful process of learning how to breathe again. It takes a little under 2 minutes before he can sit up. Kyle is crouched beside him, asking questions that Wade cannot yet answer because answering requires air, and air is arriving only in shallow, painful increments. When he finally gets vertical, assisted by Kyle's arm, unsteady on legs that are not quite sure of themselves yet, he looks around the terminal for Chuck. Not to continue anything. He is not, at this moment, thinking about continuation. He is thinking about the 5 seconds, which are already starting to loop in his mind in a way he suspects they will not stop doing for a long time. 2 airport security officers arrive at 6 minutes past 7. The senior one, a broad-shouldered man named Bill who has worked this terminal for 19 years and has genuinely seen most things, finds Chuck in the gate waiting area, identifies himself, explains that multiple people have reported a physical incident at the check-in counter, and asks for an account. Chuck provides one, without embellishment, without omission. The pushed luggage, the comment, the attempted dominant push. His response, Bill takes notes. Then he speaks to 6 witnesses. He comes back 12 minutes later. Every account is consistent with yours, he says. His tone carries the specific neutrality of a professional who is forming a personal opinion he is not going to share officially. Multiple witnesses confirm you made verbal attempts at resolution before any physical contact. You're within your rights to file assault charges. Chuck considers this. Genuinely. No, he says finally. I have a flight. If something got through to him today, that's enough. Bill nods once. Writes something. Closes his notebook. Kyle, speaking to the second officer across the terminal, explains in a quiet, embarrassed voice that his friend has decided not to pursue the matter. The real reason that Wade cannot construct a version of this story that does not include the part where he ended up on the floor of a public terminal after trying to push a man 60 pounds lighter goes unspoken. Both officers understand from context. Wade says nothing. He and Kyle take a later flight. 3 people approach Chuck in the gate area before boarding begins. The first is a lean man in his mid-40s named Frank, a former tournament fighter who spent 15 years competing in regional circuits and now runs a small training school outside of Houston. He introduces himself with the particular deference of someone who has just seen something that exceeds his own professional ceiling. I've been competing and teaching for 15 years, Frank says. What I just saw, the wrist redirect, the timing of the sweep. I've read about that kind of sequencing, but I've never seen it done at that speed against a resisting subject. Would you mind telling me what system you trained in? Chuck thinks for a moment before answering. Tang Soo Do, he says. Primarily. But what you saw wasn't a system. Systems are vehicles. What you saw were principles. Intercept during preparation, before the force has generated momentum. Strike at the center mass where the impact transfers most efficiently. Use the opponent's committed weight to complete the geometry of the fall. Those principles work regardless of what you call your system. Frank nods slowly, writing in a small notebook. The timing of the sweep, he says. How do you read the moment? Feel the weight shift, Chuck says. Don't look for it. Feel it through the floor, through the air between you. When all the weight commits, that's the moment. You can't think it fast enough. You have to have it before it happens. Frank looks at his notes, then back up. Thank you, he says. That's going to change how I teach that sequence. The second person is a young woman named Claire, perhaps 26, who is standing 3 people behind Chuck in the line and who approaches with the slightly unsteady quality of someone whose adrenaline hasn't fully metabolized. I was watching him work his way down the line, she says. I saw how he pushed past people. I was already preparing myself for when he got to me because I knew it was coming and I knew I was going to have to decide in that moment how I was going to respond. She pauses. Thank you for not just stepping aside. Not just for yourself. For the whole line. Chuck looks at her for a moment. He was doing what he'd always been able to do, he says. Nobody had ever made the cost of it real for him. That's not entirely his fault. He pauses. But it was past time. Claire's quiet for a moment. Then she says, Do you think it'll be different now? Chuck considers it. Honestly, I don't know, he says. The moment was real. What he does with it is his. The third person is a man of about 65 named Harold. He moves with the particular economy of someone who has carried serious physical work for a long time and has learned to move efficiently under it. He spent 2 years in Korea, 31 months of it in conditions he has decided are not suitable for airports or public spaces. But he knows what he saw. Son, he says, and the word carries no condescension. It is simply how he addresses men younger than himself who have earned his attention. I've seen real violence. Enough of it to know what controlled force looks like when someone actually has it. You stopped the moment the threat was neutralized. You didn't continue past the point of necessity. That kind of discipline is rarer than the technical ability. Chuck receives this. The goal in a real confrontation is never to destroy the person, he says. The goal is to end the threat. The moment the threat ends, continuing is no longer self-defense. It becomes something else. And that something else creates costs, legal costs, moral costs, that the original moment didn't create. He pauses, knowing when to stop matters as much as knowing how to act. Harold nods slowly. He extends his hand. They shake. The gate opens at 7:45. What happens next is not something Chuck plans for, and not something any witness in that terminal expects. Wade Garrett walks through the gate door. He and Kyle have been rebooked on the same flight, the only available departure for their destination before noon. He sees Chuck the moment he walks in. He stops walking. For several seconds, he simply stands there. The terminal noise continues around them. Kyle stands beside him and says nothing. Wade's face is different from the face he wore at the check-in counter. The certainty is gone. Not beaten out of him exactly, corrected out of him. He looks like a man who has been carrying a very specific belief about himself for a long time and has just had it removed and hasn't yet figured out what to carry in its place. He walks toward Chuck. Kyle stays back. This takes something. Whatever he still has left, it takes some of it. I don't know how to say this. Wade starts. His voice is lower now. The performance of it is gone. What I did with your bag. What I said. He stops. I've been thinking since I got off the floor. He stops again. I don't have a good reason for any of it. I just always, he exhales. I never had to think about what I was doing. Nobody ever. He shakes his head. That's not an excuse. I'm just trying to explain where it was coming from. I'm not sure I fully understand it myself. Chuck looks at him. The full, unhurried attention. Not warm exactly. Not cold. Present. I know where it comes from, Chuck says. Wade looks up. 6 years of iron, Chuck says. 6 years of walking into rooms and watching everything move for you. You started to think the moving was about you. It wasn't. It was about size. Those are different things, but they feel identical from where you're standing if nobody ever shows you the difference. He pauses. I'm not the right person to be angry at. You built something real. You just built it in the wrong direction. Wade is quiet for a long moment. I said something, he says, about the people in the line. What I called them. His jaw tightens slightly. I said it loud enough for everyone to hear. I was trying to, he stops. I don't know what I was trying to do. Make myself bigger, I guess, by making someone else smaller. He looks at the floor, then back up. That's a specific kind of ugly. I know that. Yes, Chuck says. It is. Is there something I can do? Wade asks. He doesn't finish the sentence. Chuck thinks for a moment. Go find the airline employee at the counter, he says. Sandra. Apologize to her specifically. She had to stand there and watch that happen in her workplace, and she handled it professionally, and she deserved better than what you gave her. He pauses. Then figure out why you needed to feel bigger than everyone else in that line. Because the body you built didn't give you that, and neither will a bigger body. That's an inside job. Wade nods, slowly, like a man absorbing something that doesn't quite fit the shape of anything he has held before, but is starting to understand is going to have to fit eventually. He extends his hand. Chuck looks at it for a moment, then takes it. It is not forgiveness in the comfortable, clean sense. It is something more honest than that. Something more like, this happened. You caused harm. You know it now. What comes next is yours. They board separately. They don't speak again. In the months that follow, a few things happen that no one coordinates and no one plans. Wade Garrett stops competing in bodybuilding. Not because of what happened, not entirely, but because the question Chuck left him with turns out to be genuinely hard to answer, and he finds he can't train the same way while sitting with it. He starts boxing, not to fight, to understand the difference, as he puts it to the trainer who takes him on at a small gym in Fort Worth, between a body that looks like it does something and a body that actually does it. The boxing trainer, a 50-year-old man named Ray who has seen every kind of person walk through his doors, watches Wade for 2 weeks before telling him, "You're strong, but you're fighting yourself more than you're fighting the bag. Whatever you're working out, work it out. Then come back and we'll talk about actual technique." Wade comes back. He also tracks down Sandra's supervisor at Continental and submits a written letter of apology, not to the company, but addressed specifically to Sandra. He doesn't know whether she receives it. He sends it anyway, because Chuck said her name specifically, and he has learned in the months since April that specific matters. General apologies are for the person offering them. Specific ones are for the person who is actually hurt. Years later, Wade Garrett becomes a personal trainer of a different kind than the one he was before. He works primarily with young men in their early 20s, the age when the mirror is loudest, when size feels like power, when the gym can become its own kind of closed world with its own closed logic. He tells them things he didn't know at 27. He tells them that the mirror is a liar, not in its facts, but in its implications. That the way a room adjusts to your arrival is not about you. That there's a version of strength that has nothing to do with what other people move out of the way for. He doesn't tell them about Dallas. Not directly, but it shapes everything he says. Chuck Norris gave one interview in which he touched on the encounter, without naming anyone or describing it in detail. The interviewer had asked him about the difference between competition strength and functional strength, and his answer was the kind of answer that comes from someone who has thought about a question for a very long time. People build their bodies to produce a response in other people, he said. The gym gives them the response. Admiration, intimidation, the physical adjustment of a room. That response feels like power. It looks like power from the outside. But there's a difference between a force that works in one plane, in one movement, under controlled conditions, and a force that works when the world is moving in every direction at once and you have half a second to respond. He paused. A lot of men spend years building the first kind and thinking it's the second kind. The first kind gets you trophies. The second kind is something else. He didn't say anything more specific than that. He didn't need to. There is a particular kind of lesson that cannot be taught. It can only be experienced suddenly, unexpectedly, in a place as ordinary as a check-in line on a Tuesday morning. The 5 seconds on a terminal floor, the way air leaves and does not come back quickly enough. The view from the linoleum, looking up at fluorescent lights, while everything you thought you knew about yourself is quietly being reclassified. The lesson is not about losing. Losing is simple. People lose all the time and recover all the time and nothing changes. The lesson is about why. Why the line had always moved. Why the room had always adjusted. Why the size of a thing and the power of a thing can look identical for years and years until the moment. Inevitable, always inevitable when they don't. Wade Garrett is, in his 50s, a man who treats people gently. Not with a performance of gentleness. With the actual thing. He makes eye contact with service workers. He holds doors. He waits his turn in lines. He does not take up more space than he occupies. People who know him later describe him as one of the most respectful men they've met, which always makes him laugh slightly. Not bitterly, but with the specific rueful warmth of someone who knows exactly where that description came from and how far it traveled to get there. He never met Chuck Norris again. He never stopped being grateful that he did. The terminal at Dallas Love Field returns to its ordinary morning business within minutes of everything concluding. The couple with the broken-wheeled suitcase reaches the counter. The businessman with the loosened tie gets his seat assignment. The mother with the 2 children successfully navigates boarding. Sandra finishes her shift at 2 in the afternoon and drives home thinking about the letter that will arrive 3 weeks later, which she will read twice and then keep in the drawer of her bedside table for reasons she does not fully articulate to herself. Chuck Norris's flight departs on schedule. He finishes reading the papers he had been working through. He eats the small bag of pretzels that comes with the drink service. He looks out the window at Texas falling away below. He does not think very much about what happened. Or more precisely, he thinks about it the way a craftsman thinks about the work he has just done. Checks it over. Confirms it was what it needed to be. Turns back to the present moment. The threat ended where it needed to end. The response was proportional. The geometry was clean. And then, a boarding pass. A duffel bag. A seat by the window. The ordinary continuation of an ordinary day. That is the thing about real capability. The real kind. It does not need an audience, and it does not need an aftermath. It arrives when called, does what it must, and quietly goes back to where it lives. It does not require a stage. It does not require a witness. The moment on the linoleum is not a story about dominance. It is a story about what happens when two very different kinds of work, 6 years of one kind, 20 years of another, occupy the same 5 seconds of the same Tuesday morning, and about what a man can do with the floor afterward if he is willing to let it teach him instead of just humiliate him. That part is always the choice. It was Wade's choice. He made it slowly, imperfectly, across months and years that nobody filmed and nobody narrated. But he made it, and that, quietly, without announcement, is the part that actually matters.